welcome everyone to this last panel before lunch. So we'll try to stay within time and not keep you away from food. We are going to talk about the heart, mostly. We'll try to touch upon the kidney as well. And we thought that it's an exciting time to speak about cardiovascular and cardiometabolic because there is an overall impression that we see a comeback of this therapeutic area. And I immediately want to make the disclaimer, this is not based on any statistical analysis of any numbers like deals, financing rounds, exits. This is just a general impression in our industry right now because we see a lot of interest in that field. It's great for patients, but also for the biotechs that gets a lot of attention. Obviously then also consequently for the investors. I would like to warmly welcome my panelists. Very pleased that you all agreed to join. I think we have a very nice mix of different industries, pharma, biotech, and investors. And we'll go through a round of introductions in a couple of minutes once I went through a couple of slides where I would like to just set the stage and hopefully provide a positive outlook in the end, what we're seeing in the cardiovascular field. I think the cardiovascular market, and I hope you will all agree, has ever since been characterized by at least three things. One is big brands. Two is with these big brands, it's typically a big impact on society because they're addressing diseases that typically address very large populations, be it heart failure, be it obesity, be it hypertension, diabetes, you name it. And the third one, and I think it's an important one, they come with big revenues for pharma. And this is important to mention because big revenues for pharma also in cardiovascular specifically come with a future liability, I would say. And the liability is that given the nature of the market, the primary care market, pharma companies need to build quite large infrastructures in terms of sales infrastructures. And this is great while the drug is on patent and generating revenues, but this is a huge burden once you're approaching the patent cliff, and you need to be able to sustain and to maintain the sales infrastructure, which is admittedly not an easy task to do because you are under pressure to deliver innovation in a billion scale kind of drug market. And that's why I think it explains partly why we see cycles of interest and lack of interest in this market, because pharma companies sometimes just cannot sustain their franchises because the pipeline is just not yet there, either too early or just not there. It is not primarily driven, as many might think, of lack of unmet need. And if you actually look at historical graphs, and you all know that, it's probably in the same ballpark as cancer and infectious diseases. We have done a great job. We reduced cardiovascular disease death rates quite significantly over decades. But still, whatever statistics you take, you will realize that cardiovascular risk factors are still the major driving factors for deaths. And so we feel in our industry that there is still a lot to do, as long as there is a good alignment between the different stakeholders, investors, biotech, pharma, regulators, and payers. And as I said in the beginning, we feel today is a good time to speak about this. Today is a good time to invest and to develop drugs in multiple areas within cardiometabolic. You all know these examples, and some of them came back just recently. So diabetes, obesity, hypertension, maybe just to name three diseases that were maybe received less attention in the last 5 to 10 years, and now coming back with a lot of deal activity, also approvals, and this is obviously fueling the market and fueling the the sentiment in the market for cardiovascular. I would like also to mention what the challenges have been, in addition to what I already mentioned about the sales infrastructures of pharmas and their liability. I think for a long time, and this is still not completely gone, cardiovascular markets have been considered highly genericized markets, right? So there is a sort of it's good enough mindset with physicians, because for most diseases there is some standard of care, and it's very difficult to change the treatment paradigm. It has also been again and again discussed, especially for investors, that investing in cardiovascular companies is quite a risk, because historically you would need an outcome study. If you cannot finance an outcome study, you are stuck between phase 2 and phase 3 and completely dependent on an acquirer. And I think this is changing. This is changing with the regulatory environment. People are more open to, let's say, surrogate biomarkers or surrogate endpoints, or just new endpoints. And I think this is also driving innovation in this field. And I said we are going through cycles of prioritization and deprioritization in biotech and pharma in cardiovascular. And this is nothing special also compared to other therapeutic areas. So I think we're just following the markets and the financial cycles here. And on the right-hand side, you see that there's some good hope today and on the horizon for the future, because of this renewed interest in some of the areas that were overlooked or at least received less attention in the last couple of years. And I would like to close this introduction and then get to the interest of my panelists with just a few snippets of deals, financings, IPOs in the last couple of years. And I think this is a great testimony that there's a lot of movement, big rounds being raised, big deals being made, and I think some surprising, some not. Also, new modalities are entering the field, so that's also great. It's not all small molecules, it's not all oral. We are talking about gene editing, we are talking about injectables, we are talking about very sophisticated patient selection strategies. We will cover all of this, or try to cover all of this in our panel. So with that, I would like to stop here and start the round of introductions, starting with Christoph.
Yes, thanks so much, Dima. So I'm Christoph Broja. I'm with EQT Life Sciences. We are a European-based life sciences venture investor. Over the last 30 years, we have invested in over 150 companies, including in the cardiometabolic space. So I guess we have invested through a few cycles of cardio being in and out and in and out again. We've looked back at our deal flow. I think we have had about 10% on the biotech side coming through cardiovascular companies. On the medtech side, it's quite different. There, about 1/3 of our deal flow and the investments that we've done are in the cardiovascular space, which really speaks to the attractiveness of the fundamentals of this sector. We have made investments, for example, in Cardior. I'm very excited about that company, and we're going to hear a lot more about that. We have also invested in Xylocor on the US side, so companies that harness new modalities, ASOs and gene therapy to address cardiovascular diseases. We've also invested alongside Forbion in New Amsterdam Pharma, so more the traditional modalities. So really therapeutic agnostic, if you will. We have a fresh fund, over €1 billion now to invest, and of course we're looking for differentiated companies that we can get behind. Very excited to be here today.
So I'm next, Claudia Ulbrich, CEO and co-founder of Cardior Pharmaceuticals. Cardior Pharmaceuticals is a clinical stage biopharmaceutical company dedicated to the discovery and development of non-coding RNA-based drugs in cardiovascular diseases, so a new treatment modality. We aim to provide transformative treatments to patients worldwide in cardiovascular diseases. And we do that by leveraging a platform of distinct non-coding RNA-based compounds to treat large but also niche indications in cardiovascular diseases. We have a lead compound that is called CDR132L. That is an ASO, antisense oligonucleotide targeting microRNA 132. That is crucial in the development of heart failure. And this compound is now in a multi-center randomized phase 2 trial in Europe, addressing the need of patients in a subpopulation after myocardial infarction in the so-called HFrEF situation. The trial is enrolling up to 280 patients, running in 8 different countries in Europe, and has 50 centers active. We aim to have top-line data by end 24, beginning of 25, and this development is backed by a very robust and compelling data package comprising safety, tolerability, and already early beneficial effects on the disease. Backed on this first trial in Europe, we are now going into a second indication, so adding value in a chronic heart failure market in a subpopulation with cardiac hypertrophy in the so-called PEF situation. And for this trial, which will be a US-led trial from Harvard Medical School, we are currently raising a Series C with roughly 65 million euros. The company has already raised 80 million euros with investors leading in the A round by Equity, the B round by Incaf Capital Partners, and now we are gonna to raise the C round. We will expand with that funds also our clinical operations into a larger market and attractive market in the US. And we'll prepare also for capital markets readiness to have improved exit options, because that's what investors are about, finally, to do successful exits in a very exciting field. Happy to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me to join this exciting panel, and looking forward to the discussion.
Yes, thanks all, and thanks Dima for inviting me to the panel. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Hermann Kaiser. I'm Vice President of Business Development at ARMGO Pharma. We are a clinical stage biotech from New York, and we're spun out of Columbia University, New York. We work on renin receptors as targets. These are intracellular calcium release channels that are associated with diseases resulting from dysfunctional calcium handling that is relevant in muscle cells, cardiac muscle cells, so heart diseases, as well as skeletal muscle cells, skeletal muscle disorders. ARMGO Pharma has developed small molecules to address dysfunctional renin receptors. They repair the channel and can therefore address cardiac diseases that I want to focus on here today, relevant for this discussion. That is renin, that is a CPVT, catecholinergic polymorphic ventricular tachycardia, a genetic arrhythmia, a rare disease, and heart failure. And as mentioned, we're clinical stage 2. We've launched a phase 2 in CPVT this summer. And we have first evidence of efficacy from a phase 1b trial from last year. And we're proud to be backed by venture syndicate, including Forbion, Pontifex, and Kurma.
So thank you also from my side for the invitation to be here, and good morning. My name is Kahr. I'm Senior Medical Director at Neurimmune, biopharmaceutical company based in Zurich. I'm an MD by background and working in the clinical division of Neurimmune. Our company focuses on translating the human immune repertoire into novel antibody therapeutics. While others believe in artificial intelligence, we believe in the intelligence of the human immune system to develop effective and safe antibodies. Our first antibody is known as aducanumab, and it was shown that it's able to deplete amyloid, beta amyloid from the brain in patients with Alzheimer's disease and was approved by the FDA. And most recently, we have applied this technology also to cardiovascular targets. Specifically, earlier this year, we've been able to publish results of our first human study in ATTR cardiomyopathy, a rare form of heart failure caused by deposition of amyloid in the heart in the New England Journal of Medicine. And we could demonstrate in this proof of concept study that treatment with our antibody is reducing amyloid in the heart. And we have partnered this program with Alexion, the rare disease unit of AstraZeneca, and they are accelerating this program now into phase 3. So we are very excited about this program, but obviously there are other targets as well in the cardiovascular cardiometabolic space that could be a potential target to our platform. So looking very much forward to the discussion.
Yeah, hello. Thanks for inviting as well. I'm Yanina Lenz, and I'm a scientific licensing officer at the business development part of Bayer Pharmaceuticals. I'm also a physician by background, and prior to joining industry, I worked across academic settings and governmental institutions. And as for Bayer, as many of you know, Bayer has a long history of developing cardiovascular medicines and still has a strong footprint in this space. So we have portfolio ranging from established products to recently launched products, as well as a pipeline of cardiovascular assets. And of course, cardiovascular is not the only franchise that Bayer is developing. So in addition, we have footprint in multiple therapeutic areas, but one of the most recent moves is also collaboration with our affiliates that develop cell and gene therapy platforms across indications, including cardiovascular indications. And I have to clarify what Bayer means by cardiovascular. It's quite confusing, but actually we're interested in cardiovascular cardiorenal space, and meaning that we are looking from the in-house as well as from the external opportunity perspectives at the drugs for heart diseases, for kidney diseases, for thrombosis, as well as for acute care. So it's much broader than cardiovascular in that sense. And that may be picked up later in these discussions, but we intend to remain leaders, to keep our leadership position in the cardiovascular space. However, our focus is moving from very large indications to targeted populations. In that sense, we've been MOA agnostic, so modality agnostic. So this is probably of less importance for us, but definitely we're looking for opportunities that would benefit rather targeted subgroups of populations with the highest unmet medical needs, and where you can demonstrate most of innovation and most of leap clinical benefit.
Thank you for the introductions. I think we heard a variety of diseases that companies are working on, and maybe it's a good bridge that you provided, Yanina, on targeted populations. And I mentioned that in my intro as well, that it seems to be a trend, and it's no news. It's been there for at least 5 years. So maybe the biotech companies, starting with Claudia and then Hermann and Peter, can comment on how you see this aspect of enriching or selecting patients, matching them to your mode of action. So basically following a little bit of this targeted or precision approach in cardiovascular.
Okay, then may I start? So as briefly touched in my introduction, we have been taking special attention to selecting patients according to our mode of action and selecting so-called subpopulations in both indications in heart failure, REF and PEF, where we feel that the mode of action of our drug applies best, so that the benefit these patients have is also much more pronounced as going into a broader indication or population right from the start. So that is pretty important, because that also drives later on the development into phase 3 trials. And for Pharma, what we recognized, and we had the first attention to our company 2 years ago when we had phase 1b data, that they were also looking for driving the program into phase 3, but based on really a solid proof of concept in maybe an entry indication, but then broaden it to the larger market. So this is what we experience, and that's why we selected patients in these two subpopulations. Although I must say in the PEF situation, it's already an attractive market potential because it addresses 30% of this population, and that makes 10 million people in the world. So we feel it's not a niche, where we started.
Yeah, so for ARMGO, as I already alluded to, we work on kind of genetic disorders as well as heart failure, and so the whole company strategy is currently actually focused to get to a proof of concept based on the genetic indication CPVT1. That is the major form of CPVT where you have patients have mutations in renin receptor 2, that is the cardiac isoform. And that basically also governs our selection of patients. So we have a genetic way of identifying our patient pool for this rare indication. That's why we've chosen this in the first place. There's other aspects about getting faster to that proof of concept, etc. And that's causally, of course, linked to the mechanism of action of our drug, this small molecule. And if we then move or expand, and that's the perspective, into heart failure, we don't have genetic markers, but we have identified a ECG feature as a biomarker that occurs roughly in 10% of heart failure patients, and we can use this ECG feature as a selection marker to carve out a certain subpopulation of the bigger heart failure population. So taken together, we have genetic markers as well as ECG biomarkers that we use. Importantly, both of these markers are linked to our mechanism of action, and we're confident that that will give us the best chance of success with our approach.
So from our perspective, the ATTR cardiomyopathy is the ideal example of a disease or indication where you start off in a very small, very well-defined population. So previously, these patients had a specific genotype. It was considered a hereditary disease, and with a clearly specified group, patient target population. But now, actually, as we all learn more about this disease, we understand that there's a wild type form of the disease. So these same aggregates accumulate in any heart, basically, as we reach 60, 70, 80 years, and ATTR cardiomyopathy may make up to 30% of the HFpEF population that was previously mentioned. So I think it's an ideal scenario where you start off with the targeted small, rare population, but there is actually a window to a much larger population that could benefit from this treatment.
Thank you. I would like to spike in the views of an investor and also pharma company into this discussion of starting with a smaller population, and Yanina mentioned this is an explicit strategy of Bayer. While on an investor side, we sometimes hear a clear threshold of what the asset should be able to deliver, otherwise there's no interest. And we heard numbers like blockbuster, or terms like blockbuster, or numbers like $1 billion or 500 million minimum, otherwise we don't look at it. So what is your experience with this strategy of either having just one smaller indication or at least a strategy from small to large? Christoph, you want to start?
Yeah, maybe I'll start, and then I'm curious what the pharma lens is on it with regard to sort of the patient population size. I think from an investor standpoint, I know you touched on it also on your slide. I think the critical one is the fact that cardiovascular is a therapeutic area with a pretty low probability of success in general. I think when I looked, it's about 8% on average versus 13% for the average of all therapeutic areas. We can't ignore that as investors, and so if you have a strategy to enrich your patient population with high responders, I would think of this as more of a de-risking first. And secondly, I would think about how to get to your proof of concept faster and cheaper. That's not really the most relevant metric to look at. I think from my standpoint, it's more about how do I de-risk the program, or the corollary, how do I increase the chances of success to get there. The second aspect, you mentioned it as well, and others, is of course the fundability of programs. Because even if you are in the preclinical stage, investors will look at, can I match the capital requirements ultimately with what's available both in the public markets as well as on the private side, and there needs to be a match. Can't tell you that there's a specific cutoffs. Funds have also been getting larger and larger, so I think we can afford better, more robust trials now than we could before. But certainly if we talk about the classical CVOT mega trial, that would be hard to do in a private setting. So I do think it's important, or can potentially be attractive, to pick a subpopulation that's still big enough to be attractive ultimately to pharma, and that's also clinically relevant, where patients can actually be identified, and you don't introduce complexity into the treatment paradigm with diagnostic methods that don't exist.
Yeah, I can only say that I fully agree with what you said, and this is approximately our view as well. So there's no particular threshold, but I think the first starting point is the clinical benefit. And I think what is driving our thinking in terms of going to the subpopulations is that identification of patients who have the highest medical need, but then who can benefit the most. And another 10th drug for heart failure for all comers that is given on top of the other 9 drugs, or even on top of the other 5 drugs, is just adding to incremental benefit. And that's, as Dmitrij was alluding to, the large indications, usually the indications where there's some generic treatment available, there's multiple options available. So the drug has really has bring leap innovations. It really has to make really meaningful clinical benefits in order to be uptaken in the clinic now, independent of the development difficulties, just to change the paradigm so that the physicians would prescribe and the patients would uptake. And I think this is our first starting point of thinking when we say that now, with advances in science and diagnostics and recognition of multiple risk factors and biomarkers, we are able to identify smaller subgroups of patients, or maybe even rare diseases, where the benefit is the highest. And following on that, of course, everything else what was mentioned is true, that would lead to smaller clinical development, to de-risk trials, the trials that do not require 10,000s of patients, require less investment and less time to complete, so that the actual drug could become available for the patients sooner than the trials that we used to run in the past. So that's our first driving point, first starting point, but also when we think in terms of how rare should be rare or how rare can't be rare, of course, commercial aspects play a role, but what also plays a role is the indication itself. So, and the ATTR cardiomyopathy is a perfect example of an amazing success story where the patients have been identified, where tafamidis paved the path of becoming the first drug that is available and changing the life of patients, but it also triggered the development of second-in-class compounds, having different modalities, other modalities, so which are seen as meaningfully adding to the first compound in that space. So this is, I think, is critical, and there's no strict framework, but in any compound in the rare space has to add to what's already available, or has to be the first one. And maybe the last point I should mention, what we consider is also reimbursability, because we talk a little bit about the CVOT trials, but what we observe now is that in Europe there is a tension between endpoints and the trial designs that are approvable and the reimbursability. And here sometimes the HTAs have different viewpoints on the pricing strategy, on what is relevant, which may not be quite in line what is really patients relevant or what is really, from regulatory points of view, approvable. But unfortunately, this is the situation, and this is one of the key drivers of our decision, whether we partner or not, whether we in-license or not, thinking to start with whether we would actually be able to bring the product up to the market and make them available to the patients.
To bring up a relevant point of, you mentioned we need a leap in innovation, which very often coincides with a leap in regulatory innovation as well. And you mentioned endpoints and how they match with payers' perspective as well. So would be interested, whoever feels comfortable speaking about this, if you had interactions with regulators or also with pharma companies, is there more openness, flexibility for, let's say, the non-classical endpoints in cardiovascular diseases? I think everyone is associating cardiovascular risk events, so hospitalization, death, as the hard endpoint, and that is also intimidating to everyone to go this way, because this means typically large, long trials. Do you see any improvements there? I mean, we see that in other therapeutic areas that regulators are opening up and trying to understand the patient, as Yanina, as you mentioned, because very often the hard endpoints do not show us the full picture of what is a real burden to the patients. Any views, volunteers?
I think our experience is that the agencies are still quite conservative in this aspect. Just a week or two ago, there was an FDA advisory committee meeting on patisiran, which is one of the other ATTR cardiomyopathy drugs, and they had a primary endpoint of a quality of life questionnaire and a 6-minute walk test. And while the drug may get approved based on the outcomes of this study, there was an uber-long discussion about the clinical meaningfulness and trying to go for endpoints, surrogate endpoints that are scientifically more meaningful. For example, NT-proBNP, it's a marker of cardiac stress. It can be measured in the blood, extremely reliable and predictive of events. The agency is not actually open to allow this as an endpoint for a pivotal trial. So we still see some issues there, and while these markers are extremely important to deliver the proof of concept, they are not accepted at the moment for the phase 3 studies.
What is missing? How do we get there? Is the ball on our side? Do we need to provide more correlation?
Yeah, I think that's needed, actually. I think studies need to be designed in a way that actually allow the agency to use this biomarker. In a way, there is a process that needs to be followed to approve a new endpoint, and I think we as the industry need to deliver the data to do this. NT-proBNP specifically has been used, for example, by Novartis to bridge indications coming from an adult population into a pediatric population, but that's a very rare instance.
If I may add, we have made not a quite similar experience, but I would, in line with what Peter said in terms of acceptance of surrogate endpoints for pivotal trials, unless the industry has not shown any kind of proof of concept with really pointing towards harder endpoints. So we have also chosen surrogates for our trials like NT-proBNP and left ventricular and systolic volume index. So that's a mass reduction marker, very well translating into harder endpoints like mortality and reduction of hospitalization. But finally, the industry is not there because it has not been proven so far that these endpoints, these surrogates, show really clinical, meaningful results. And that is why these large trials with 10,000 or more patients have been run to show tiny differences in the existing symptomatic treatment options, which we do have now. But it's on us to prove that. And finally, we are very confident that once we have these data, we can also discuss with the authorities, and the FDA is open to go away from these larger trials if there is good evidence that these surrogates could serve at least as a composite endpoint in outcome trials. But for sure, at the moment, we have mortality and reduction of hospitalization. And we try to make here also a change.
Yes, I would agree here with Peter and Claudia that there is, especially in cardiovascular, there's authorities are in general quite conservative, especially for the bigger indications, and heart failure is certainly one of the biggest in that field. Coming from a rare disease perspective here, because that's kind of also where we are very active, and looking what's happening elsewhere, we see that the authorities, the FDA and EMA, have set up expedited approval pathways that are really trying to reinforce surrogate endpoints. And that has been used, for instance, takes Sarepta's eteplirsen or Elevidys, and in Duchenne. But it has taken a lot of discussion how relevant that is. So that's what Claudia and Peter said. We have to show that these endpoints are relevant. And maybe a good starting point is really smaller indications, rare indications, with a high medical need where there's no other treatment options, low standard of care, etc.
Thank you. Very interesting perspectives. On a similar topic, what really matters to the patients, of course, in addition to improving the quality of life, is also some sort of convenience of the treatment. And we touched upon in the introductions of modalities, right? And Yanina, you mentioned that Bayer is even interested, or not even, but interested in cell and gene therapies in cardiovascular as well, besides the rather classical modalities like small molecules and antibodies. And Claudia, you mentioned you're developing an ASO, so I would be interested to hear, maybe starting with an investor perspective, because there's some challenges attached to investing in at least advanced modalities like cell and gene therapies. And then whoever wants to comment on how you see the match of cardiovascular disease and modalities that are outside of the classical small molecule antibody.
Sure. I mean, take the punchline away. I think there's space for multiple modalities. I think, from my standpoint, new modalities obviously carry a little bit more risk, both from a development standpoint, because they are less defined. The MOA is not quite as well understood yet, but they are potentially transformative. And I think we're in an environment now where, and Claudia mentioned it, where we see incremental improvements, new hypertension drug, which is a little bit better than the other three that are already approved. I think we're going to get to that point where you need to see some really fundamental changes in disease progression. If we take hypertension, if we take heart failure, especially in heart failure, obviously we are, as EQT, are quite excited about the potential of ASOs, where that promise to stop or reverse the disease progression, because the reality is that despite all the treatments that are already approved, many patients still end up in this vicious cycle of in and out of the hospital, getting diuretics, and then 30 days later, they're back in the hospital. So I do think we need to start at the top of the funnel and develop therapies that can really tackle these big, still unmet needs that exist today. Which is not to say that we don't like small molecules anymore. And I don't really hear pharma say they don't like small molecules anymore. So there's certainly a place for that as well. There's a convenience angle, right? We're talking oftentimes about big chronic diseases where a pill versus an IV, of course, is a potentially interesting proposition, not just in cardiovascular, but also in different therapeutic areas. And we see that trade from many investors. So really, I would look at unmet need and biology of the disease first, and then using the right tool to address it. And I think long-term, pharma does have to keep an eye on novel modalities, because we can't just be adding more and more incremental improvements.
May I immediately jump to Peter, because I think you have an interesting case with tafamidis and also BridgeBio, I think, developing a small molecule for the same indication while you were going in with an injectable antibody. So how do you see that in ATTR cardiomyopathy?
What we're trying to do is to remove the amyloid through phagocytosis, and that's an approach that you need an antibody for. It's not possible with a smaller molecule, we think. When you talk to patients, they want this stuff out of their heart, and they are willing to do whatever is needed, and they don't mind coming to the hospital or the doctor once a month, once every 3 months, maybe to get an infusion. The problem we see is that the cardiologists are not ready for this. The infrastructure is not there. They don't have infusion beds where they can infuse IV drugs on a large scale. And I think that's an issue, as we're kind of the first to enter this new space of cardioimmunology, something that neurologists had, some time ago, but they actually managed to ramp up their capabilities, and it's completely accepted now for these treatments. So, of course, subcutaneous injections are preferred over intravenous injections, etc. But in the end, I think the mode of action may drive, and the efficacy in the end may be more important than the mode of administration.
Yeah, I may add, so also for us, this was a consideration at the beginning when we developed our compound in terms of galenic and formulation. So we are currently using a short-term IV infusion for the patients. And in our trial, this is given 3 times in a monthly interval, which is very well accepted. On the other hand, if we face the chronic application and the larger markets later on and patients' compliance and convenience, we are currently developing a subcut formulation that is well underway. So we will have next year a clinical bridging study that will enable us then to provide physicians and patients in later trials with a subcut formulation, and ideally we want to have that to be used as an insulin pen. So that is what we are currently working on. On the other hand, I think for a clinical study period, it's really acceptable to have intravenous injections, and it's nothing complicated like an antegrade or retrograde application in the coronary artery system. So, and we get enough material into the heart to have a full depression of the target. So this works quite well, but I also believe that needs to be improved for later, more chronic applications.
Thank you. We have a little bit more than 5 minutes to go. I would like to interrupt the panel and ask if there are any questions from the audience, comments.
Hold on for a microphone.
First, I apologize for my ignorance, but I was very encouraged to hear that the removal of amyloid in the heart is a very advance, because the removal of amyloid in the brain has not been as efficacious as was planned. And I'm wondering if your difficulties with the FDA comes out of a broader era of suspicion, because of the recent amyloid controversy with Alzheimer's disease?
So the subject at hand, the changes in surrogate markers in heart failure, NT-proBNP, is undebated by the scientific community, and everybody believes if you show that you can reduce NT-proBNP, for example, or show an improved contractility by different markers, that's an important intermediate step to improving, in the end, mortality and morbidity. So I don't think that there is an interplay necessarily from that amyloid perspective, but still within heart failure itself, it seems that the agency is not ready yet to accept such biomarkers to reduce trial sizes and approve drugs. I think because in this specific incidence, it has not been shown that in a prospective trial that NT-proBNP reduction, for example, reduces mortality long term. It's a rare disease still, and the data is not there that specifically in this indication, this link between a reduction in the biomarker and mortality has been substantiated with data. But if you look at, to the left and right, to other heart failure population, you see this clearly and without doubt, actually. Yes, I think for the field it will be important, and we will certainly make sure to collect this data so that it can be used for future trials, to use this biomarker as an endpoint for future studies. Correct. Yeah.
This is also, my question is directed at Peter Kahr from Neurimmune. As you know, Alnylam has also a drug against ATTR. For the treatment of ATTR, they're probably slightly ahead of you. Where do you see the advantages of your antibody-based therapy compared to the siRNA-based therapy of Alnylam? Or could you see combination therapies actually as a possibility?
So thank you for the question. I think we position ourselves very differently from Alnylam, although there will be naturally combination therapy probably happening. Tafamidis that was mentioned, or patisiran, eplontersen from Ionis, they are drugs that slow disease progression. They prevent further buildup of amyloid, but there is no treatment available that reduces the amyloid. So I think these studies have validated the target. They have done outcome studies, the ATTRACT study, that has shown to target TTR as a molecule is successful to reduce mortality in these patients. But the unmet medical need is huge, and patients on tafamidis have a 30% mortality at 30 months still. So I think we can combine our treatment very well with a baseline of stabilization, and I think only long-term data will show how this plays together, whether you have a phase of removal that is then followed by a stabilization period, or how this would work in detail.
We only have time for one quick question, so that's your chance. There we go.
Okay, so since we know that there are multiple protein aggregates in neurodegenerative diseases, is like pan-amyloid antibody therapy a sensible strategy?
I'm afraid that's another question for me. Sorry. So we think the future is precision medicine, and there have been companies that tried to develop pan-amyloid antibodies personally, and that's the learning from, for example, this program. We believe that a specific antibody to a specific epitope is superior, something that is only present in particular patients. It's absent in physiological protein forms. So our perspective is that a pan-amyloid antibody is less likely to be successful.
We are exactly on time, and as promised, we will not keep you away from lunch. Thank you very much for attending. Thank you to the panelists. Really enjoyed to hear the different perspectives, and stay tuned on cardiovascular. There's more to come. Thank you.